First of all, to David on his special birthday. Thanks to Isabel and the family for sponsoring it in honor of David's birthday. And Isabel and David have been huge friends of NCSY and the OU. And Dr. Stanley and Marla Frolinger are good friends from Florida who've been huge friends of NCSY and the OU over many years. We want to thank both families for this warm, gracious sponsorship. We may not be able to get to everything. Hopefully everyone has the outline. Here's the challenge. There's a term that keeps getting floated, that Western civilization, of which America we are part of, we are rooted in this concept of the Judeo-Christian ethic. And that's the way we do business, that's the way we engage in international politics. And there's this principle, this catch-all phrase, the Judeo-Christian ethic. I want to challenge that, okay? The reality is, Choshen Mishpat, and if the world would appreciate Choshen Mishpat, has nothing to do with the Judeo-Christian ethic or the term that gets floated. And in fact, what defined our people and our whole nation, and our impact on the world and civilization, was what we call the world of ethics and morals, the world of Choshen Mishpat. And it starts at the beginning. Let's go back. Why is Avraham chosen? If I ask you this question, why were Avraham and Sarah chosen by God to have the responsibility to be God's partner in the transformation of the destiny of humanity? Why were they specifically chosen? So everyone says, that's what everyone says. He's the first person in history, and by the way, this is pre-Descartes, this is St. Thomas Aquinas, this is pre the Rambam. The first man in history that through rational, logical investigation took him decades. The Rambam says the two midrashim are not contradicting each other, they complement each other. He started questioning as a precocious kid at the age of 3, and according to the two versions of the Medrash, either it was at 40 or 48, till he came to a philosophy of ethical monotheism. So he wrestled for 45 years with this. Everyone says that, and it's all true. That's not why God chose him. God tells us, the Ribono Shel the master of the universe, tells us why he chose Abraham. Ki yadativ. You know why I'm going to have this intimate relationship with him? Leman asher I'm quoting right now the beginning of Parshas Vayera. Leman asher yitzave es banav es beso acharav. Because one thing I know about Abraham, he will transmit not only to his biological family, but to his community, to do what? To observe the Derech Hashem. What is the Derech Hashem? La'asos tzedakah u'mishpat ba'aretz. Here is the great revolution. La'asos tzedakah u'mishpat ba'aretz. What is that? It's the first time in history that religion does not manifest itself in what I do for God or how I conduct myself in a church, in a mosque, in a shul. No. Religion is defined, let me just move away from the podium, right here, by my wallet, okay? By how I treat my employees, by how I negotiate a deal, by how I market my product, by how I pay my taxes, by how I compete in the marketplace. Religion is manifest in what we call social intercourse, the world of business, be it wholesale, retail, be it real estate, be it Madison Avenue, be it intellectual property. That is where religion manifests itself. And that was a revolution. Because what does God have to do with my interaction with other people? That has nothing to do with religion. That was the revolution. Leman asher yitzav, it's something that he would transmit to his community, is lasos tzedakah mishpat ba'aretz. And let's give a few examples of this. And that's the outline. And I apologize, I'm rushing because this is really a 90-minute presentation that we're going to make a bris milah. We're going to shrink it down to about 55 minutes, okay? Number one, a concept that we function with, onas mamon. All of Western civilization is predicated upon a certain principle that exists in Roman law. Caveat emptor, buyer beware. Listen, you didn't go on the web, you didn't buy a blue book, you didn't do your research, you're a schlemiel, you're a fool, and shame on you. Don't blame me because I overcharged. Or for instance, let's say that I'm a wholesaler in stamps, in coins, and you inherited something from your uncle. You don't know what it's worth. So you call me in. And right away with a smile I say to you, listen, you understand, I'm selling it to the retailers. So I'm only going to buy it at pre-wholesale price. Okay. And you say the most exciting words that anyone can hear. Well, what's it worth? When you tell me what's it worth, oh my God, I'm salivating. I'm a Pavlovian dog. And what happens? On the buy, on the sell. I'll give you an example of a sell. We're here at Citi Field. Within a 20-mile radius of Citi Field, there's probably somewhere between 18 and 22 Lexus dealerships. Okay? I walk into the dealership and I want to buy a Lexus. I want to buy the 4 Series, the car that will park itself, because I'm not very good at parallel parking. And I don't know. I didn't do my homework. And you see that. You're a salesperson. And you charge me way above and beyond the fair market value of this. What's the halacha? The Gemara in Bava Metzia tells us. It's all predicated in Parshas Bahar, at the end of Sefer Vayikra. Lo tonu ish es achiv. You can't take advantage of someone who's naive. You can't take advantage of someone who is unaware of the market. It's not stealing. It's not manipulation. I give the price. You choose to buy the car. I offer you for your uncle's coins or for your uncle's stamp collection. You choose to sell it to me. No. If there's a fair market price or even a fair market range, I have no right to do that. We don't say caveat emptor. There's a concept called fraudulent pricing. That's not part of the Judeo-Christian ethic, quote unquote. And by the way, take a look. Those of you who have the Torah Tamima, he quotes the Meiri, he quotes the Rambam, and he quotes the Ber HaGaola, who himself was a survivor of the famous Khmelnytsky massacres, the infamous attack by the Ukrainian Cossacks that destroyed all of Eastern European Jewry, and it forced him to flee all the way from what today is the Ukraine, at that time was Eastern Galicia, all the way to Amsterdam. And he talks about Jews not setting up fair pricing with Gentiles. Or when a Gentile came into the bar, because the Polish, what we call the Polish magnates, they had Jews managing all of their assets in the Ukraine. So when the guy was a drunk, and he gave him, let's say, a $20 bill, and you gave him change for a 10, he said, no, it was only a $10 bill. And he talks about that as a potential cause of the terrible anti-Semitism in what at that time was the worst tragedy in the history of Ashkenaz, worse than the First Crusade. That's an example of the responsibility a Jew has. Number 3, Genevas Das. It says lo tignovu in the plural, lashon rabim, the plural. What's the don't steals? What is this? Joe Pesci, the Utes, right? The plural, don't steals. So the Sephardic Rishonim pick up on that. The Ritva talks about it. The Rabbeinu Yonah and the Shari Tshuva speak about it. Echad genevas mamon, the echad genevas das. We know in the Aseret Dibros, in the Decalogue, we understand that lo tignov is referring to kidnapping. That's actually kidnapping another human being. Davar halamed mi'inyano, because it's talking about capital offenses, murder, adultery, kidnapping. But lo tignovu teaches us about stealing someone else's assets or property. But what's the plural? There's something that can be even worse than stealing someone's assets. It's manipulating another human being. Genevas das. Look at any financial statement. There's something called goodwill. You've all seen it, those of you who own equities, own stocks. And goodwill sometimes is maybe the most precious asset that a company has. If you're Johnson & Johnson, I'm going to buy your pharmaceuticals. If you're Pfizer or GlaxoWellcome, I'm going to buy your pharmaceuticals. Because you have a trusted name, you have a reputation of decades of complying with FDA, of complying in taking care of my loved ones, my friends. I'll give you an example. In a couple of hours from now, the home opener in Orchard Park in New Era Field, that's upstate New York, the only football team in New York, the Buffalo Bills, okay? They were bought by a famous family, the Pagulas, who have a fortune of properties in terms of natural gas and oil, and they bought. One of the bidders for that team was a person that lives not too far from here, Donald Trump, happens to be our president right now. If you look, because Goldman Sachs handled, in Morgan Stanley, they handled the sale from the Wilson estate. Bon Jovi was the number 3 bidder. The number 2 bidder was Donald Trump. And if you look at his bid, which was $1 billion bid, on the bid, $400 million. It's fascinating. He put down his goodwill of the Trump name, the Trump Realty name. He put down not cash, not equities, not real estate, but goodwill. So we joke and we laugh about that. But goodwill, whether it's, I'll give you an example. I really had nothing to do with your kid shidduch, but I played you and I made it like it was me, who got the parties together, who put in the good word that they should date your kid. I had nothing to do with your son or your daughter getting a job, but I make it like, because I happen to be an employee at the same company, and I make it like it was my connection. And I said, you've got to interview this person first. I play you. Now you're forever indebted to me because you think I set up your kid, or you think that I got your kid a job, or you this, that, etc. It's a function of what you do for me and my family. It's a function of what you do in terms of me getting business opportunities and deals, you using your political capital. So what did I steal? What did I do? Look, I just made him feel good. I just put a smile on my face. I'm a born salesman. No, you're not. The worst thing you could do is manipulate another human being. That's lo tignovu. It's not just genevas mammon, where I steal your asset. It's where I manipulate and I steal your integrity. I steal your whole perspective on something. And it's a problem. It's a problem that we as rabbis have, because there are certain times that people are dependent upon rabbis. It's a problem we have in the business place. Number 4, dina de malchusa dina. All of you are familiar with that famous principle. Now, you all know in Aramaic, if an aleph is at the end of the word, it's the equivalent in Hebrew of a hey being at the beginning of the word. So dina means hadin, the law. De malchusa. What is in Hebrew is malchut. Malchut is what? The government, right? De malchusa, the law of the land, or the law of the government, is dina, is the law. What does that mean? You and I know, let's say when you had a huge population of Baltic Jews, of Ukrainian Jews, of Polish Jews living under Tsarist Russia. And let's say, for instance, that under Tsar Alexander II or under Tsar Nicholas I, they make a decree, you can't observe Shabbos, or you're not allowed to wear tefillin. You and I know they have no jurisdiction over what we call Isser V'Heter, what we call religious law. However, why is it that if you own an apartment building and the lease is up, but that tenant wants to stay, you want to take them out because you want to bring in a new tenant, you can up the price of the apartment. No. New York City law says you have to keep that tenant. Even though the lease is up, if that tenant wants to stay, they can continue there. Why do they have jurisdiction over my apartment building and over my ability to engage in real estate commerce, but they don't have jurisdiction over my Shmira Shabbos or my Kashrus or my Tefillin? How is that? So that in itself is a 1-hour shiur, at least, of different shitos. But the point is this. How does it work? The Shach says this. Rav Moshe Feinstein Zatzal says this. The Ramah. When you and I, who are guests of this country, and that's why we have an obligation to pay taxes, and if we lie on our tax returns, you and I are invalid. We can never serve as a witness. Can't serve it as a witness at someone's wedding. Can't sign their ketubah. Otherwise, they're not married. Otherwise, the ketubah is a worthless document. We are guests of this land, and there are conditions in living in this land. Those are the conditions that are legislated, which is why it's a very religious obligation to pay taxes. irrespective of whether we agree what the government does with the money. If we don't like it, move somewhere else, move to a different country. But part of the conditions are this. Part of the conditions is a Jew, is that there are implicit conditions in any time we do business. So you're all familiar with a principle called Tanaim, explicit conditions. If you and I put in a contract certain conditions, explicit conditions, and the witnesses sign the contract, we're bound by them. A Beit Din, a court of law, they'll all uphold it. But what Dina de Malchus Dina is, not that it's telling us to violate the Torah. That's not what it's saying. The law of the land is the law is saying the following. There are certain implicit conditions in how I lease or rent my real estate. There are certain implicit conditions in what I do when I take on an employee to work for me. You understand? Those are implicit conditions, and they are bound. We're bound by them in a Beis Din. That's the principle Dina de Malchus Dina. If I want to use the highway system, I have no right to speed. It's a condition for me to have the right to use public property. And so on and so forth. Number 5. One of the major issues we have right now, why there's such volatility in our stock market and the equity markets, is that unfortunately, for the last 40 years, both Republican and Democratic administrations have cowered to the Chinese. The Chinese have stolen everything. They steal our movies, they steal our music. They steal the most sophisticated weaponry that we have, our V-22s, our F-35s. They steal intellectual property. So the president, leading the administration, is standing up to this. Literally hundreds of billions of dollars every year is taken from this economy by what we call intellectual piracy. Now, you talk to someone in China, they don't think there's anything wrong with it. They will acknowledge, I can't come and steal the tie off your neck. I can't come and steal the purse that's on your shoulder. That's thievery. That the Chinese will acknowledge. But what's intellectual property? What am I taking? What, you had a chiddush in Torah? You came up with a nice piece of music? That's intangible. It's ethereal. You have a derivation that could be used on Wall Street or could be used in hedging an investment. That's ethereal. You came up with a certain electronic approach that enables a fighter jet to fly in a stealthier context so that the Russian surface-to-air missiles cannot attack it. That's a concept. That's an idea. And they find nothing wrong with that. They sleep very well at night, stealing hundreds of billions more. It's hundreds of billions a year. It's trillions in aggregate. And in America, finally has said, we're putting our foot down under this administration. Adkan, Dayenu. That's a phenomena that the second largest economy on earth still does not have as part of its ethical system. And I got news for you. Until 100 years ago, it didn't exist anywhere. You wanted to take a piece of music that Mozart or Beethoven created, you wanted to record it and sell it. At that time, it was records. You know, our children don't know what that word means, you know? But at that time, it was records. No problem. And all the proceeds go to you. None of it goes to Beethoven's descendants or Mozart's descendants. Not so in Judaism. For the same reason, there's a concept. It's called bailus, control of something. If you built a house, or you built, your name is Leonardo da Vinci, and you painted the Mona Lisa, or your name is Michelangelo, and you sculpted David, that's your creation. So too is creating a piece of Torah, writing a piece of music, producing a script, a screenwrite, making a movie, coming up with a derivation, developing a system to produce a stealthier aircraft. No different than painting, than Da Vinci's Mona Lisa, no different than Michelangelo's David. There is no difference. That's the concept of intellectual property, and there's an Issa Doraisa of Geneva on that. The most famous case that we don't have time to go into is the famous Rabbi Meir Katzenellenbogen, who was one of the greatest Jews on earth. He was the leader of the Italian Jewish community, what was called the country of Venice. Venice wasn't just a city. And one of the major cities in the country of Venice was Padua. And no Jew had the right at that time with the printing press. It was all controlled by the Christians, but Jews would go to Christian printers. And the Shas had already been published, first by Soncino, then by Bamberg. Now they were going to come up with the great next step. What was that? They were going to print and publish the Mishnah Torah of the Rambam. The Rambam's magnum opus, the Mishnah Torah. And another Christian printer stole all of the galleys for it and started to print another version. If you take a look in the Shelus Achuvas Ramah, Siman Yud, the Italian Jewish community turns, because it was a real issue, they turned to the Ramah, and the Ramah put a cherem. Anyone who would use this new Mishnah Torah that is all predicated upon stolen intellectual property from years of work by the other Christian printer together with Rabbi Meir Katzenellenbogen, what we call the Maharam of Padua, anyone who uses the second printing until every volume that they printed in the first printing, the Katzenellenbogen volume of it, is a cherem on such a person. That means we don't accept the person to a minyan. That means that person can't be buried in a Jewish cemetery. That means you can't do business with them, can't invite them over socially. To drive home this point to the Jews, that not only is it thievery, but we're gonna set up consequences for the stealing of intellectual property. This is something that existed in the 16th century, this case. Long before the whole notion came to Western civilization. Weights and measures, number 6. It's fascinating that last week in the Parsha, there's a very interesting nuance. It says, lo yi'alacha. What is lo yi'alacha? You can't even own, I'm talking about a commercial weight. Now, by the way, many of us, our scales, especially, the holidays are coming up. Can you imagine this? You're going to have Shabbos, 2 days Rosh Hashanah, Shabbos, or at least there's a Yom Kippur in there, right? But then there's going to be 2 days Sukkot, a Chol HaMoed, and another 2 days. The best of us are going to put on 6 to 8 pounds, okay? The best of us. So we might manipulate our scales in the bathroom. The Isser Dorais is not applying to that. That's called Genevas Das against yourself. But we're talking about commercial measures, commercial weights. My family were German Jewish survivors, and in Germany for over 300 years, we were in the cattle business in Unterfranken. That's what we did in America. We lived about 50 miles upstate New York, about halfway between Buffalo and Rochester, across the lake from the wolves. And we have livestock. Buy and sell dairy and beef, cattle, had farms. And I said to my daddy, there was one grain merchant. He used to pay better than anyone else for wheat, because we produced wheat on our farm. We produced oats. We produced corn, not the corn that you eat, but we'd call field corn or cattle corn. I said, Daddy, how come we don't take it from our silos? Why don't we sell it to that merchant? He looked at me with a little smile. He said, Chacham, you tell me why I'm not selling it through that merchant. He says, how is it that everybody else is paying the following per ton for wheat? Everyone else is paying the following per ton for oats. How come he's paying more? He says, you don't understand? He says, he's making more than everyone else because he's cheating the farmers on his scales. His scales are crooked. That's why. And that's why we're not doing business with him. Not only can a Jew not cheat on weights and measures, you can't even own, you can't have in your possession, in your domain. It's an Isser Doraisa to have an incorrect scale. That's how far our system goes. Number 7, I'm going to skip that because we're running. Number 8, I'm going to say something right now. Please push back if you think I'm out of line. If you think I'm out of line, push back. Our community, when I say our community, the greater Orthodox community, it has branches, the Hasidic community, the Yeshivish community, the centrist community, the modernish community. We've made great strides. Already 50, 60 years ago, that our wives and daughters could use a mikveh of dignity as opposed to a smelly, slimy but something that was dignity, that stood up to any club or any sauna. We did that. Shabbos became a reality. Where there's a Shabbos, where there's a programming for kids, there's learning, there's a social engagement, and people can actually get a job by being Shomer Shabbos. Our community overcame that. The whole basis of, one of the foundations of the Young Israel movement is they had a whole network trying to get people a job who wanted to keep Shabbos. We've overcome that. And in many, many areas, we used to have these crooked sofrim who would sell you, bazooka bubblegum wrappers. You thought you had a mezuzah on your door. Today, there are very thoughtful, sincere sofrim. You can get good mezuzahs, good tefillin. One area that we still have to give din v'cheshbon to the Almighty, where we're really behind, and we're really, that maybe is one of our next challenges, is that we as a community, what happens when there's a labor dispute? What happens when there's a contractual dispute? What happens when there's a fight over a piece of real estate? We all run to court, right? Every one of us has nuclear weapons called our attorneys. We get our attorneys and we go to court. And it's a tragedy because, again, and I'm going to demonstrate this physically, you want to know if someone's a God-fearing person? You want to know if someone really is a religious person? To me, the litmus test is right here. In the wallet. In your bank account. If God is relevant in your life, do you put your money where your mouth is? And it's a tragedy that we don't use the system of Beis Din. And I'm specifically now referring to, I'll give you an example. There's an outstanding Beis Din in Lakewood. You ever heard of the Beis Din Meisharim? Many of you are familiar with the Beis Din of America. It has a series of scholars that work with it. Okay? If we really believe that this system is perfected ethical monotheism, that's why we're Jews, right? We're not B'nai Noach who keep a broad understanding of ethical monotheism. The Sheva mitzvos. 7 is, I'm using a number 7, but it's reflective of ethical monotheism. What's Taryag? It's perfected ethical monotheism, both on a theological level, Bein Adam L'Makom, and on a moral ethical plane, Bein Adam L'Chavera. So when it really counts, and I'm not saying there aren't crooked Batei Din, and I'm not saying there aren't Batei Din that are Maratzim. I'm talking about there are some really fine Batei Din. And I gave you the example of 2. Beis Din Meisharim in Lakewood, and the Safra Dedaini, his name is Rabbi David Cohn, he's from Chicago, outstanding. Rabbi Dovi Kahan is the Av Beis Din, Ari Marburger, and you have the Beis Din of America. When it really counts, what happened to... It's not something hidden in the middle of the Chumash. It's the first words of the parsha. Elah mishpatim asher tasim lifnehem. Moshe Rabbeinu says, look, these are the principles that we lead our life by. And when there's an issue, tasim lifnehem, bring them before a court. Beit Din, i.e. Velo lifnei arkol shalakim. We don't run to secular court. Now, by the way, you and I know this. The cost of going to secular court, the agmas nefesh of secular court, the pain of secular court, it's not something that we love. Find a Beis Din that you can respect. Find a Beis Din that if there's nuances and subtleties in the secular law, and you're concerned that maybe these rabbis don't have that background. They don't have the legal background. They don't, because of Dina de Malchus Adina, which are the implicit assumptions. They don't have the Shimush. So there are Batei Din that do. And that's something that sets us apart. And I'll tell you this much. I'm not saying going to Beis Din. Whenever you're in a fight with someone, emotionally it's very painful. It ages you. It hurts you. You can't sleep at night. I understand that. But that agmas nefesh doesn't compare to a long, drawn-out court process. Nor do the attorney's fees compare to the attorney's fees going to a court process. Number 9. Now, number 9 should never be here. What do I mean? If you go through all of Choshen Mishpat, you go through all of Jewish financial law, you won't find one word about interest there. Where will you find it? In Yoredeya. Yoredeya deals with what we call Isser V'Heter, religious law. Doesn't deal with financial law. Can I ask you something? What in the world is this doing in Yoredeya? You talk about interest on a loan, interest. There's nothing more financial than interest. So why is it not in Choshen Mishpat? And the answer is very simple. There's nothing immoral, there's nothing unethical about charging interest. And I'll prove it to you. If it was immoral, I could never charge a Gentile, a non-Jew, interest. If it was immoral, I could never borrow money from a non-Jew with interest. Let's take a step back. Pretend that Avis is not a publicly held corporation. Let's assume that Avis is your private company. Can you charge me when I want to rent a car from you? Is it moral? Absolutely. You own real estate. Whether you own commercial real estate, retail real estate, residential real estate, I want to rent from you. Are you going to charge me, and is it moral for you to charge me for me to rent your apartment, rent your retail space? Absolutely. And it's absolutely moral for you to charge me money when I borrow money from you. Our president became president in January of 16, okay? If I had, let's say it was $1 million I borrow from you. You know what that $1 million would be worth today if I just put it in the S&P 500 or I put it into a mutual fund? That $1 million today would be worth $1.6 million, $1.7 million. There's something called opportunity cost. It's absolutely moral for me to charge you interest. So why can't I do it? Why can't I? It has nothing to do with Choshen Mishpat. That's why it's in Yoredea. That's why it's quote-unquote in religious law. Everything's religious law, but what the world calls Isser Veheter, religious law, not financial law. You know why? Because you're my brother, and you're my sister. And the Torah calls you that. Achiv is brother. Achicha, your brother. You're not my brother. I have a good friend here, Jonah Kupietsky. We're not related. He comes from a different part of Europe than my family does. We happen to be friends. No, Jonah's my brother. Right? He's not heavy, he's my brother. Remember, we're at a baseball stadium. Remember the 1979 Pittsburgh Pirates with Willie Stargell? We are family. Look, every one of us, we're related. Now, we might be a dysfunctional family, but we're a family. And let me ask you something. My mother, God forbid she should ever need her child. My mother comes to me to borrow money. Am I going to charge my own mother interest? My brother comes to me to borrow money. I'm going to charge my own flesh and blood? We came out of the same womb. I'm going to charge my brother interest? Absolutely not. The Torah, God is trying to inculcate in us. You look at a fellow member of the covenantal community, whether they were born Jewish, whether they converted to Judaism, you look at a fellow member of our covenantal community, we're all brothers and sisters. And by the way, you see that many places God inculcates that mentality. He legislates a context to inculcate that mentality. Hashavas Aveda. I'm sorry for being trite, but you've all heard finders, keepers, losers, weepers, correct? You've all heard that. If you lost it, Nebuch, you lost it. If my mother lost something, I'm going to keep it or I'm going to give it back to my mother? By the way, you know, I didn't say my mother-in-law. I said my mother, right? No, if my mother loses something, I'm going to keep it, I'm going to give it back to her. Of course. That's the way you treat family. If someone is a part of the covenantal community, you treat them like a brother and sister. That's why there's a prohibition of interest when it comes to a fellow Jew. And it's not Choshen Mishpat, it's Yoredea. Number 10, labor laws. And I apologize. Each of these topics is at least a half hour to 40 minutes. I'm just trying to paint a picture. That's why I'm rushing so fast. Number 10, labor laws. Please don't trust me. Open up the Mission of Torah when you get home. Look at the Rambam and look at the end of Hilchos Schirus. The Rambam's laws in terms of how you treat an employee and what an employee's responsibility is to their employer. Rambam says something. It's wild. So do me a favor right now. Let's skip about 3 months to Parshas Vayetze. You want maybe the most famous speech in the whole Bible. Maybe that's not true. Mordechai's speech to Esther is the most famous speech in the Bible. But this is one of the top 3 or 4. is what Yaakov says when Lavan and his sons, when they hunt down his own grandchildren, his own daughters, his son-in-law. They're probably somewhere in the Golan Heights. Yaakov is heading back to Israel. And that's where Lavan confronts him. And he challenges him and he accuses him. And Lavan responds. And I'm sorry, I said that wrong. Yaakov responds to his father-in-law Lavan. And I'm going to quote part of that speech. Vatechalefes maskurti aseres monim. It was a 20-year period. 14 years Yaakov worked because he lied and swindled and manipulated his own son-in-law. He used his own daughters as barter. And then the last 6 years, when he saw that Yaakov turned him from being a schlepper, a poor man who had to use his own daughters to shepherd his sheep, he became a massive cattle baron. So in the last 6 years, to keep Yaakov, he broke the contract 100 times. Aseres monim. Aseres is 10. Monim, monez, 10. 10 times 10 is 100. 100 different times he changed the contract in a 6-year period. And what does Yaakov else say? If an animal dies of frostbite, I bore the responsibility. It was your animal. I paid for it. As the CEO, as the managing shepherd. If an animal in the summer died of dehydration, I paid for it. If an animal was attacked, not by a lion or a bear, but let's say even by a fox, I paid for it. Anochi achatena. So you look at that speech and you say, there is no greater piety, act of Hasidus, in terms of one human being to another. That's how he treated a person who swindled and manipulated him. He went above and beyond. Incredible. That's Yaakov is the Isha Emes. That's integrity. And what I just said is wrong. Cross out everything I just said. Because when you look at the Rambam, you know what he said? The way Yaakov conducted himself was not an act of Hasidus. It was not going above and beyond the letter of the law. Yaakov was paid. You all know that the deal was changed, ripped up, the contract 100 different times, but there was always a contract, and he was paid for what he did. That's the din. That's the din. If you're a shomer sachar, if you're paid for the job, yes, if it would be a lion or a bear, you'd be exempt. That's called ones. But if it's a fox that you could have prevented, that's not going to attack or kill you, you're responsible. If there was frostbite at night, you're responsible. You should have corralled them in a barn instead of leaving them out in the pasture. If it's dehydration during the day, you should have brought them to a watering hole, a pond or a lake. You're responsible. Even though you didn't do anything on purpose. That is the demand. Translate that into our terms. Other than myself, I don't think we have too many shepherds in this crowd, right? You're a guy you're a woman or a man who's got a fortune. You've got massive 6-figure debts between university, between medical school. You work in a hospital during the day. You just got a job moonlighting at night, so you can pay off some of those terrible debts. If that moonlighting job is going to wear you down that you can't give 100% during the day, you're a ganav. You're a thief. You have no right to take that job, and you're stealing from the first employer. Let's say you're a young whippersnapper. I don't know about you. I'm one of those people who turns to their adolescent children, and it was even before my kids were pre-adolescent, and I'm suffering from PTSD because my phone froze up, or I don't know what to do, or I think I lost data on the phone that was important for work. Please help me, I'm one of those. So these young kids who grew up on technology, they can do circles around people like us. Not because they're brighter, but because we're just not sophisticated when it comes to technology. And they swim in it. So imagine this situation. You're a whippersnapper. You're 24, 25 years old. You get a job. You're replacing someone in their 60s. You can do, because it's a technology-driven job, you can do 3 times what they can do. Does that give you the right to do the following? You know what? I'm going to do the job. I'll do 1.5 times what they do. But then I'm going to go on Amazon, and then I'm going to surf the web, and I'm going to this, and I'm going to look for deals, Dan's deals, and this and the other thing. No. The Rambam, after giving us the statement of Yaakov, he says, Hapoel tzarich la'avod bekol kocho. An employee has to give 110%. You have to give everything you have. That is the din. That's not an act of Hasidus. That's not so simple. That means unless the company is going to give me the mileage, when I fly, or the points when I stay at a hotel, it all belongs to the company. I can't assume it belongs to me unless they put into the contract it belongs to the employee. Okay? I have to be careful. You have now in many states, there's the legalization of marijuana. These young people are running out, and not just the young people, the oils. They're inhaling the oils. People used to have a cigarette break. What does that do to your productivity? Okay? Let's leave aside right now the issue whether it's addictive or not addictive. What does that do to your productivity? I'm talking about where it's legal. And the schmoozing in the hallway. And, slichas, you come late to work. Well, who says? Why does slichas have to come off the employee's back? That's off my back. Not the employer, I'm sorry. I meant the employer's back. It's off my back. That's, the Rambam says, is the din. That's not Judeo-Christian ethic. We have to give din v'cheshbon. What kind of employers are we? And by the way, is an employer the same thing? Here's where I want to end. I want to go back to two biblical narratives. You're all familiar with them. One is the story of Yosef, and the other is the story of Lot. Both of these, I'm quoting in the name of Rav Aaron Kahn. You are all familiar with Rav Aaron Kahn. One of the greatest Talmidim of the Rav, gave the Chazar Shir, was the head of the Kol Elyon, was Rosh Yeshiva at Yitzchak Elchanan, has the famous base Medrash, the Shul, Knesset base of Vigdor and Flatbush. They started Arga de Pirka. So Rav Kahn said the following. Think about the image we have from the time we're children. What gave us that image? The famous Medrash Rabbah, the Bereishis Rabbah. It's a famous Gemara and Sota. And who made the Gemara and Sota and the Bereishis Rabbah? Who made it popular? Rashi quotes it on the Chumash. So, Yosef, he is working for Pharaoh's chief executioner, who, because he has a number of other government monopolies, is an extremely wealthy man, Potiphar. But the Torah calls him Potiphera. So Chazal say the following. What's Potiphera? He liked men. He wasn't there for his wife conjugally. And she just felt the deprivation of love because he liked men. And what happens? There's this exquisite, brilliant, outstanding young man who everyone respects, who her husband, because he likes the golf course, is basically handed over the estate, the multiple businesses, and this young slave is running it all. And she's tried multiple times to seduce this young man. Finally, she plays the game. It's a religious holiday, a pagan holiday. Everyone's off to the pagan temples, and she feigns sickness, and no one will know. And you all know the story. He doesn't succumb. But the Medrash in the Gemara and Sota say, what gave him the ability? He's a young man. She put on lingerie. She smelled beautifully. There's nothing stopping him. He's all alone. He doesn't have a wife. He doesn't have a woman. What prevented him? So it says, he saw the image of father. Demus deyukno shel aviv. That's the phrase Chazal. What image of father did he see? Can I ask you? That's what Rav Kahn dealt with. What was the image of his father? His father, who was manipulated, who was backstabbed by Lavan for 20 years. We gave examples. His father gave every day. Cold, heat, sickness didn't matter. He gave 100% every day. He grew up with that, with a paragon of morality, of ethics. A profound ethical sensitivity of what it means to take responsibility and what it means when you engage in a contract. It doesn't matter what kind of a manipulator, what kind of a terrible person he's working for. He gave his word, you stick to it, and you give it 100%. Me, Joseph, a slave? You look at how most slaves were property. They weren't even subjects, they were objects. It's true this guy is an oisvorf. It's true this guy doesn't care about his own business. He doesn't remunerate me. But I got to tell you one thing. He doesn't treat me like the other slaves. And a slave has no value. A slave can't defend himself in court. You can be executed at the whim of your master. I'm going to turn on my master like that when he's treated me the way he's treated me? The image he saw was his father. No rationalizations, no justifications. You know, if he would take care of his wife, she wouldn't be this way. He could care less anyways because he doesn't like women, he likes men. All the excuses in the world that Joseph could have justified and rationalized. Not one rationalization. The image he had was the image of his father. His father. And that's what gave him almost a superhuman courage to run away. Not to violate this man's marriage. And then the last issue. Avraham. From the time our grandchildren and children go to nursery school, go to the Gan, what happens? They come home either with a three-dimensional or with a picture. The first image they have is Abraham and Sarah's tent, open on all four sides. They welcome everyone. Look at this. They didn't know these were malachim. They were three pagan, dirty men. They brought them in and they treated them like kings. It was the Ritz-Carlton. It was Four Seasons the way they treated them. They cared for everyone. The worst deal Avram ever made was standing up for Sodom and Gomorrah, Sodom v'Amorah. You know why? Because as long as that sick, perverse civilization is doing well, it undermines the ethical revolution of Avram, where we started an hour ago. It undermines everything that he's communicated, everything he stands for, of what it means to be a man of God, what it means to be an ethical monotheist, how you treat your fellow human being. They do just the opposite. The best thing that could ever happen is that society implodes, that society is destroyed, because then, it'll prove Abraham was right. No. He's willing to defend them. He's willing to stand face to face. We never see him challenging God Almighty. But for them, he challenges God Almighty. He cares for everyone and everything. You can't care for your own nephew? Your own brother-in-law? What did he say to his brother-in-law? We're dissolving the corporation. We're splitting up the business. You choose. You want to go right? Meaning you want to go to the plains? I'll stay in the hill country, the Judean hills. You want to go left? You want to stay in the hill country? I'll go to the plains. But we cannot be associated with each other. I'll look after you, but there can be no association. They have to understand these are two independent businesses. We are no longer partners. We have nothing to do financially with each other. Why? You can care for every pagan, for every shlemiel. You can care for Rishayim. You can't take care of your own family? Why is he breaking it up? Doesn't make sense. Yes, it does. How did Rav Kahn explain? If these, we call them shepherds, right? The roim. That's the employees of this corporation. What are they doing? They're raiding pasture land. If you're in the cattle business, okay, the most precious asset you have is pasture land. And they're raiding the Canaanites' pasture land. That undermines everything Avram stands for. Because if religion is manifest in how I treat my fellow human being, if religion is manifest in how I do business, where it counts in my wallet and my bank account, then if it doesn't count there, it's a fake religion. Then it's all nonsense and it's all talk and platitudes. Avram said, I'll look after you. I'll protect you. And he did. We know that he risked his life to protect them. But financially, we are dissociated. We have no association one from the other. Why? Not because he didn't love his brother-in-law, but because he loved God more. Because if he's associated with that business of thievery, of crime, of raiding Canaanites' pasture land, then he's no different than the pagans. Then God has a very, very limited place in life. It's called the shul. It's called when I put on tefillin and daven. It's called 3 hours on Shabbos morning. But God in religion is irrelevant where it really counts. In my bank account, in my wallet. And God forbid, that's not the religion of Avraham. And that's not the religion of his descendants. That's why I hate to throw around this term Judeo-Christian ethic. It's a false term. Our system of Choshen Mishpat, if we are to take it seriously, and if we ultimately, the world around us, they're going to think we're nuts because we keep shotness. You buy a gorgeous Brioni suit, and then you rip it apart to take the linen in the waistband, and you rip it apart to take the linen out of a Kanali suit or of an Isaiah. You're spending all that money, and now you're ripping it apart. You bis meshuga, right? They'll respect you that you're a man or a woman of God, but they think you're crazy. You want to make God's system, you want to make the Torah relevant, you want it to be a Mekadesh Shem Shemayim, to transform the world around us, to be an Or Lagoyim, to sanctify God's name. It's go back to Avraham and go back to our beginning. It's Choshen Mishpat. It's being punctilious. It's being serious. It's being engaged in the world of Choshen Mishpat. That's what makes us different. And that's what set Avram apart. Please God, this year, it will not be a year of Chilul Hashem, but it'll be a year of Kiddush Hashem. Whether it's Israel, our homeland as a nation, being a light unto the nations, or whether it's you and I, individual Jews, who in our social intercourse, the way we negotiate, the way we market, the way we drive, the way we treat our employees, the way we relate to our employers, ultimately, if we're a godly people and we stand for the Ribono Shel Olam system, it's manifest in Choshen Mishpat. Thank you.